Today the NDA was lifted for the people who got the early play test or whatever they're calling it. And I've been poring over videos just like I'm assuming all of you have as well. And I have, as a result of the information I've learned, I've radically changed my Paragon board, and I'm going to go over why. So first, let's start with what we learned today, or what I learned today from watching these videos that makes me change my Paragon board, um, because I'm sure it'll make you change yours as well. So first is that vulnerable damage is an additive modifier with the base vulnerable damage bonus amount, which is then multiplicative with everything. Um, that sounds complicated because it kind of is. You have to be very specific about how you say it, and that's my best guess on given the somewhat vague terminology and this here. So this is damage for beginners. It's on the Maxroll website, and it was updated. It was updated today. Today this said like the 11th, and now it says yesterday. I don't know how that works, but whatever. They retroactively updated it yesterday, and you can pretty much ignore all of this if you just read this section here. All bonuses are added together with each other and with the baseline 20% before multiplying all your damage. So that is very specific. And I don't know if you're anal like me and you understand that the terminology means different things, you'll realize that this has never been clear up until this sentence here. Another thing I want to say is that I saw a screenshot of an exploit glyph, and the exploit glyph gives increased damage to vulnerable targets, but the top of the glyph that showed the overall bonus you're getting said just vulnerable damage. And that's another anal thing, maybe you don't care, but that is very important. If damage to vulnerable targets and vulnerable enemies, and however it's worded on in the game, is all just whatever quote unquote vulnerable damage is, and vulnerable damage works like this sentence here, then that makes vulnerable damage as valuable as if you had 100% crit and you're getting crit damage. It is a multiplier with everything. It is extraordinarily important. So we have that obviously radically changes the boards we want, the glyph priority, where we put the glyphs in what board and whatnot. Okay, so that's lesson number one, and I'll go over the build later when I show you what I've changed. The second thing we've learned is that glyphs are much more powerful than we previously thought. Here, let me show you this. So this is a screen capture I took from Rob's stream. If you haven't seen Rob's videos, Rob2628 on YouTube. He's also has stuff on Twitch. If you haven't seen his videos and you're a Barbarian player, which you are probably a Barbarian player if you're watching my videos, you should definitely watch his stuff. He went all the way to tier 100 Nightmare Dungeons, which is the level 150 monsters, and cleared it. As far as I can tell, he went farther than everyone else in the game. He maxed out his character more than everyone else in the game. It's well worth a watch. And the build he ended up with is very similar to what I was planning on ending up with anyway. I talked about it in a previous video. Whirlwind and crit. It's kind of what you transition into later when you get at least what I'm going to transition into later once I can do permanent shouts. Before then, I think the gear requirement for it is a little rough, and you really need a great deal of fury regeneration, and it's complicated. But basically, you should not expect to roll in, pick some skills, and play that for the rest of the game. If you do that, you're not optimal. That's fine. Like, you don't need to be optimal. Who gives a shit? Play how you want to play. Either way, the lessons should be valuable, hopefully, going forward. The important part for this, though, I got this from Rob, I just want to give him credit, is if you look at the value here on this part, For every 5 dexterity purchased within range, you deal 15% increased damage to close targets. That is significantly higher than says on like the build sites we're using. So let's see, where am I putting tutorial, territorial? Okay, so it's right here, and if you look at this build site, it maxes out at 9.6%. So from 9.6 to it's at 15, and we have an in-game screenshot of it. I've also seen, it's a little bit later. So if all of these glyphs are better than we already thought, that's kind of crazy as well, and it should change your Paragon board, because we were already kind of prioritizing glyphs because they were generally the better thing, but now they're significantly the better thing. This is basically a 50% more damage than the glyph already gave. We already thought the glyph gave. It's like 50% more than that. That's crazy. It was already like a great thing, and now it's 50% better. So basically, you want to get a lot of glyphs. Okay, so that's lesson number 2. Lesson 3 is that glyphs are easy to get. I watched a video of a stream of Veiled Shot talking, and he said within 3 hours of getting to World Tier 3, he had all the glyphs. He just brushed off the question like it didn't matter at all. Getting the glyphs is like not an issue whatsoever. Leveling them up is a different story. You have to run nightmare dungeons to do that. That takes time, and you have to prioritize. So leveling them up is something that is more of an issue. But they're already stronger, remember? So maybe you don't have to get them to 20 to be basically as good as we're seeing in our current builds. Maybe you only need to get them to 15 just to get the threshold increase. So either way, that's fine. Either way, glyphs not being an issue is an important factor here. It means that you're probably not having some weird, funky Paragon board where you're taking a bunch of rare nodes because you think glyphs are going to be a problem. You're probably marching from glyph to glyph to glyph and just spamming nightmare dungeons to level them up, and that's the way you're going to play. So that's an important lesson as well. Okay, next lesson is that bosses are dying quickly. Veiled Shot just talked about killing every boss within 8 seconds. I don't think all the bosses die within 8 seconds. If you watch Rob's videos, Rob killed the tier 100 nightmare dungeon boss. God, that's a mouthful. And he had to do some work. He had to dodge behind a pillar and whatever. It took him definitely more than 8 seconds, but it was not long. I was hoping, honestly, I'm a little disappointed by this news. I was hoping that as you level up and you get to the end of the campaign in Act 1 and you fight that boss that spawns a bunch of ads, and it's like a long fight. It's like a 3-minute. If you have a pretty decent build, it's like a 2-3 minute fight. If you have a bad build, it's longer than that. It's annoyingly long and tough. And I was hoping the bosses were going to be like that. Apparently they're more like Path of Exile, and you just roll up your OP build and you just blow them up before they do like 4 things. That's lame to me, but that's important. That's important to know because it changes how you want to build your tree. What is valuable? Specifically, the Hemorrhage legendary node. The one legendary node I was taking on my entire Paragon build, I'm now not taking. So the only thing that I actually thought was worth it, I no longer think is worth it. That's kind of pathetic, personally, but whatever. So we don't even want that anymore. That saves us points, that's fine. If the bosses are only living like 10 seconds, then do I really care about getting a little bit more of a modifier there? If I can use the points to put them into a vulnerable mod, that's already a multiplicative modifier on all of my damage. So I can just shift those into vulnerable damage or crit damage, which is a multiplier mod as well, and I don't need to bother with that node. I think that's disappointing, but that's where we are. Okay, the last lesson, which is probably something we already knew before, or at least I've heard about it over the last week or so ago, is that based on how damage reduction works, where each source of damage reduction is multiplied into the other sources to get the result, you want as much damage reduction in each individual source as possible, and having many multiple sources of lower amounts of damage reduction is less effective. You probably already knew this, but I just want to clarify because it does like make the new build better than the old build. Okay. So what are we doing with our build to change it? Overall, we're adding more glyphs, more vulnerable damage, and we're skipping hemorrhage. That's generally what we're changing here. We're also changing up some glyphs. We're actually getting an extra glyph because we're not doing the hemorrhage legendary node anymore, so we have extra points. And we're actually skipping some of the other like damage clusters in these boards to save points just to get another glyph. So that's generally what we're changing. And the numbers end up looking like this. So I'm going to just show you this from the outset. That way you understand what you're getting out of the change. And then I'll go over the changes afterwards. So this, let's see. Make this bigger. This column here, if I can stop screwing this thing up. This is the new build. This here, version 2, is the old build. 5 glyph version 2, now we're on 6 glyph version 1. The stat changes are fairly minor. You get a little bit more strength, a tiny bit more int, a little bit less willpower. We're losing 15 willpower and we're getting, I don't know, 40, almost 40, 38 dex. Okay, very minor changes. Getting a little bit more dex. And dex is good because the thresholds that have on the rare damage nodes are generally dexterity. So having higher dex and a little lower willpower will take that trade any day of the week. Okay, life. We're losing some armor. We lose 250 armor. I don't care. There's diminishing returns on armor. That's something also we learned today. I saw a video about it, or maybe that was yesterday. Riker has a video where he goes over all the stats, and one of them shows this curve, and you dramatically decrease over time. So anyway, we don't care about the armor. The resol is the same. The damage reduction goes up by 10%, but remember, this isn't how it works, or this isn't what matters. You want bigger numbers in each individual bucket. So we're losing berserk damage to elites. That was on the ire glyph. We're dropping the ire glyph. And we're getting 10% damage reduction to vulnerable enemies, which we, to be honest, don't care about. That's kind of like a wash. But because of the board change, we're actually getting 10% more damage reduction to bleeding enemies. And that is certainly, that is the damage reduction type I would most prefer. I would most prefer to just hit something once, and for at least the next 5 seconds, I have damage reduction on it. Regardless of whether I'm next to it, close to it, far from it, whatever the hell. Or its status effects, I don't even need to be berserking. As long as it's bleeding, I'm good. And so I think that's ideal. So bumping that from 29 to 39, I think that's extremely valuable. It's much more valuable than the 10% we would lose in another section. Okay, the rest is the same. Okay, so the real damage changes here. So we're losing about 50 damage in this. This is basically, this is the additive all, like, general bucket. If you've watched other videos, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. This is the general additive bucket, and we're losing 50 damage in it, 50%. Kinda. Yeah, we're losing 50% damage in it. So there's a choice here. When you get to the last board, you're either taking Mortal Draw, which only works if you do another skill. If you are just doing Whirlwind, you do not want to take Mortal Draw, because you're not switching weapons ever. I want to incorporate Deathblow. Maybe this is just noob theory crafting, whatever. I feel like I would rather have Deathblow than Iron Skin. I don't like Iron Skin. I'd rather have Deathblow and hit something with Deathblow, pop my Whirlwind, kill a bunch of stuff, pop my shouts, hit something with death blow, whirlwind, and do that again. I like that better, and I like if so. There's an important part of this as well. This glyph is only going to work if the mortal draw benefits snapshot with whirlwind, and I don't see why they wouldn't. I would think that they would. If for some reason they don't, then you don't want this. I don't know how to test that like super easy. I don't have access to the game. I don't know. This is a very niche thing. I don't think people are going to test it. I'm going to assume it's snapshotting. If it doesn't snapshot for some reason, then I don't know. I'll switch out glyphs and maybe test it and see if it makes a difference. See if it doesn't snapshot, then you're because it's changing your damage so significantly at 117, you should see your damage drop as as your uh, as your whirlwind goes on. But it's got to be annoying as shit to test. I don't expect anyone to test this. I'm just betting this is going to work, and I'm also getting it last, so I don't actually really care. If it does work, it might be worth getting early because it's an extremely good glyph if you can trigger but it's a little annoying. If for some reason it's not good, then you stick ire back in there, and you can stick ire in your starting board in place of whatever you have there, or you can stick it in the last board, which is hemorrhage, which is what hemorrhage is going to be the last board. We're just going to take the glyph instead of the legendary node. And you can stick ire in either of those spots, and it's just the same as the previous thing. You get 100% damage, so we're gonna lose what 17% damage, which is not very much. The big downside here of using ire over the mortal draw, if the mortal draw works, is that ire takes 5 more points to max. I'd rather keep those 5 points. I'd rather use mortal draw, and mortal draw also has another benefit, which is better than the 10% damage reduction I think we get from ire, which is an 18% crit chance mod. I think that's better. If you don't, you can just stick ire. Ire is safer. I'm gonna gamble and go with mortal draw, but just know that's not something I know that it works this way. I just think that it does. So use with caution. So the previous build had 57% vulnerable damage, and now we have 107. So we're shifting the 50 points in this bucket into this bucket. So we have 50% less here, but we have 50% more here. And we're getting 147% more crit damage because I'm basing this tree on using crit whirlwind because that's probably what we're going to end up being. So the overall damage increase is significant from the change. You would have used Wrath in the other build anyway and stuck it in somewhere, and Wrath would have given the same bonus. It would have just taken, I don't know, like 50 to 80% damage out of something here. Would have shifted into here. So then you would have been less damage here, less damage here. So less damage in your main bucket, less damage in your vulnerable bucket, and the same in your crit bucket from the previous build. So we're still an overall increase. All right. We don't have the minor bonuses to Berserk duration. We don't care. We don't have the movement. We don't care. So you get. We're gonna drop the bleeding vulnerable bonus from hemorrhage. We're gonna get 3 fury per crit from the Wrath glyph. We're gonna get the 18% crit chance on swap from mortal draw, and we're gonna assume that works. If it doesn't, then you switch to ire and move on. And then these are the extra bonuses, so we don't get any of this. These first ones that were in the previous build, these are not thresholds that are even applied to us at all. We don't even take these nodes anymore. Instead, we take these nodes down here. So if you see, we are only 47 dexterity away from 10% more vulnerable damage, which is the stat you want. So that's great. And you're going to get there for sure. You just hit some altars and you're going to have those points. This 117 gets another 10% fizz damage. We don't really care. If you get to that, great, but it probably won't. Maybe you do, I don't know. You get another 10% vulnerable damage if you get 88 strength and 89 willpower. So given the altars are going to give you more than half of that, you're probably going to get that. So just with those two bonuses there from a few more stats, you're going to end up with 20% more vulnerable damage. That's great. And then some damage reduction at the bottom, but it's to vulnerable, which is a very small amount up here. It would just change this 10 to 20. We don't care about that. Okay, so something to think about, something to know. Maybe you do, maybe you know math, maybe you don't. And this is relevant up here, and when we get to the build, so I'm going to go over it really quickly. So this is how math works. 100 times 3 times 2 is the same as 100 times 2 times 3. So why does this matter? This is, like, imagine the 100 is your main damage bucket, and this 3 or 2 here in the second section is crit, and then this is vulnerable. So whatever the mod is, it doesn't matter what order, really. If you look down here, if you add 10%, so if you add a 10% mod to the higher value, you're getting to 620. If you add a 10% mod or value, or add a 10% mod to the lower value, you're getting to 630. So why am I showing this? I'm showing this because you're balancing two buckets. You're balancing your vulnerable bucket and your crit damage bucket. So whatever is lower, that's the value that's more beneficial for you to get. Okay, so the reason that matters is because you have, this is a dex glyph. Let's see. Exploit is a dex glyph. Exploit gives vulnerable damage. And Wrath is a dex glyph and gives crit damage. And unfortunately, we don't have a great deal of dex boards. And one of the dex boards we have is total trash, even though it has the best value, and I don't want to use it. It's called Bonebreaker. It's crap. I don't want overpower damage, and I also don't want damage while healthy, or damage reduction while healthy. I don't like putting a vulnerability on myself in my stats. I think that's stupid. So I don't use Bonebreaker. So the point is, if your crit is higher than your vulnerability, then you can just switch the exploit glyph, the vulnerability glyph, into your dex board that has the highest dex value in the glyph area, and you can move the crit one to that spot. So you basically just switch glyphs in the boards depending on which value is higher, and you're doing that to maximize this at the bottom, where you want the higher mod in the bucket that has the least value, and should be, I don't know. I want to say you could just see that on the stat sheet, but to be honest, I don't know. Good luck. Just know that's a further min-max thing you could do, but maybe that's just too much, so maybe don't do it. But I just want you to know, just in case. The math here at the bottom isn't going to be quite so simple when you decide whether or not to switch the exploit and wrath glyph, because the amount of damage you get from each per point, or per node rather, is different. So it's going to get complicated, but it's something to think about. The damage values you see here in these columns are not going to be reflective of what we see in game, because the glyphs, as I went over earlier, are more powerful. So this is based on basically a nerfed version of the glyphs. All these damage numbers are going to be higher across the board. I'm assuming that they're going to be higher for all of the glyphs, and not certain glyphs are better and others have remained the same. And that's something we're not going to know until the game starts. So if you run across a glyph that doesn't have the increased value and others do, that's going to change our priority on glyphs, and we may want to change the build again. Or at least change which glyph is in the board, which should be a fairly simple change to respec. The only downside of this is that you may spend time upgrading a glyph that you end up not wanting, and that's kind of sucky. So hopefully we have the accurate numbers for the glyphs before we start the game. Hopefully sometime in the next day or two we see the numbers reflected in these build websites. Okay, so let's go over the board really quick. So this is your starting board. So what changes here is so ignore that this says to territorial right now. You're going to put exploit here when you start. you're going to put exploit here so that every mob is vulnerable as soon as you touch it. It's going to be the most valuable glyph you have. Everything being vulnerable right away, like you're just not going to beat that. The vulnerable damage is the way it scales. You're just going to stick the exploit glyph in here. As soon as you get it, you're going to stick it in your starting board and you're going to level it. So because this is a dex glyph now and not a strength glyph, you're taking less points as you go through this section. So this is the new path. So if you look here at the strength nodes, they're all the way on the outside. You're going to have to path all the way there anyway. You don't have to get those anymore. You don't have to get this one on the outside, this one on the outside. So you end up saving some points here, which is nice. So you're getting better damage and you're saving points. That's what we want. So you move up. The first board is still the same because I'm still prioritizing damage reduction. If you watch Rob's video and you see him get chunked in those tier 100 nightmare dungeons, you'll understand. And also, I'm playing hardcore. If you're not playing hardcore, go ahead and glass cannon it all you want. I'm going with Blood Rage, and that's maximizing my damage reduction from enemies that are bleeding, and that's going to be... Okay, so there's something else about this that's important, which is that you can get damage reduction from bleeding enemies on your chest and on your pants, I believe. You can probably get them on an amulet or whatever, but you're probably not going to get that. Chest and legs. Those values are pretty substantial. I think it gets all the way up into the mid-teens on each piece. So if you could just, like, let's round it out. Let's say you just get 20% out of that. Well, you're getting 39% out of your Paragon board already. That's a 59% damage reduction to one type. And remember, I told you want the individual type of, or like source of damage reduction to be as high as possible. 59% is pretty damn good. So maximizing this is still a priority. I'm still starting with my first board is a revenge glyph. I still think that's the way to go. Okay, so here's where the changes start pretty substantially. We're still picking the Carnage board, but we've rotated it. We were going out two sides here because we were getting this. We were getting the damage to berserking down here, and we're going to go out this side. We are not doing that anymore. Instead, we're going through this damage to elite cluster. I screwed up the math on my sheet on the previous video. I don't know if you noticed, it doesn't matter, but I fixed it and it's reflective. Okay, so that goes up here. You get into the glyph node, and here it has exploit right now. What you would put here initially is territorial. You would put territorial here until you have enough points to max out the dex on this glyph area, and then you would switch them. You would put exploit here, and you would put territorial down here. That gives you one extra node in this board, one extra node of exploit damage, which is the vulnerable damage is what you want, and one less of the territorial, and that's going to be worth it. So once you get here, then you switch the glyph spot. Once you max out the dex in this area anyway. And once your exploit glyph definitely is at least rank 15, because you're going to need 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 nodes all the way on the outer ring. And those 4 nodes, if you don't have them, you're actually under the 25 threshold. So this board, you will not even get the glyph bonus at all until you get to rank 15 and have the full radius. It's just something to keep in mind. So you're putting exploit in the first thing and you're maxing that out as soon as possible, or at least getting it to level 15, and then you're switching into this board. Alright, moving up. Now we're getting a different board that we weren't getting before at all, which is Decimator. And we're getting that because it has vulnerable damage in it. So we're moving up here, going to the left, and we're picking up the vulnerable damage, and I'm ignoring the armor. If you love armor, go ahead. I kind of think it's the diminishing returns make me not want to get it. So 5, 10, 15, and this gives us 25% vulnerable damage just from this. You don't have to have a glyph. And also, you're going to hit this threshold. This is one of the ones I discussed. You're going to hit this threshold. Certain, like it might be kind of late game, but you're going to hit it. That also means you're going to hit the other thresholds on this board, and that's where the 20% extra vulnerable damage comes from. So you're going to march up here, you get into the glyph area, you're going to take the damage reduction, and you need the willpower, because a willpower is going to go, a willpower glyph is going to go in here. So you're getting the willpower, you're getting the damage reduction. You're taking the imbiber glyph. We talked about that in the previous video. It's just solid damage willpower glyph, and unfortunately, Dex sucks here. What is this board? This is Decimator, and the Decimator Dex value is 34, which is one less node than your starter board, which is just too shitty to stick a Dex glyph in here, so you're using this. And then you've got vulnerable damage up here. That's why we're taking this board. The two chunks of vulnerable damage nodes, and then you need the willpower anyway, and then you're only 5 points away from the next gate. So this is a very efficient board, especially given the value of vulnerable damage, which I did not think it was that valuable before. Okay, next is Warbringer. We were going to take that before anyway. This was going to be like the end of our build on the last one. Now it's not. You're sticking Wrath in here. Warbringer has 49 dexterity. So this is one of your later boards, but it has your highest dex value. Highest dex value of the build that I'm using, because I don't like the Bonebreaker board. So I'm putting Wrath in here. That's giving me the huge bonus to critical strike damage. Like I said, if for some reason your vulnerable damage is lower, you would switch this with the wherever you have Exploit. You would stick Exploit here, and you'd stick Wrath wherever you had Exploit. So nothing complicated here. You're just getting the dex, and you're getting the rare nodes, and you're getting out. And then that gets us to our last board, which is Hemorrhage, and we're not going for the legendary node here anymore. We're just getting the glyph as soon as possible, and we're taking Mortal Draw. And we're picking up the dex and the rare and the magic nodes that give us benefit, and I'm not even taking the physical damage over time. I understand there's going to be bleeds on my build, but not enough to make me take this node. So you're still getting the rare because you need to get the dex point here, but that's it. Otherwise, you're just getting to the glyph, and like the threshold isn't great, or the amount of dex here isn't great, but we don't have good options at this point. They're all kind of crap. So, and if this weapon swap works, this glyph is amazing. If for some reason it doesn't, this glyph is not great. It'll only really affect your death blow if you use that. If you don't do that, you would just stick Ire here, and you would just max out the strength, and that would, like I said, that would take 5 more points, but it'd give you roughly the same damage. You just wouldn't get the bonus there, which is the 18% crit chance to skills that swap weapons. So that's the gamble I'm taking. You don't have to take that gamble. I do want to mention here at the end that I have stuck the roughly end game build here at the bottom, what I expect my points to look like. This point is a little suspect. I don't actually know. I've heard somebody say that this exposed vulnerability point doesn't make your whirlwind just make them vulnerable all the time for the duration. If it did, it's pretty powerful. If it doesn't, then it's kind of not as good at all. You just wouldn't want the point probably, because you would just use you're gonna use exploit glyph anyway regardless, so this stuff's gonna be vulnerable right away anyway, so this just doesn't help you. So if this, maybe even if it helps you, you still don't want it, this is an optional point. You can just take it out. This is after you have shouts and whatnot. You're gonna need a great deal of fury generation to be able to drop lunging strike, which is what I'm planning to do, and that's going to be replaced with Wrath of Berserker. And then this node also, fury generation is going to be the thing here. Can you get enough to make this work? I think you probably can. I think as soon as you have perma shouts, I think you can probably make this work. Maybe you have to take this node here on Rallying Cry that gives you the extra fury instead of this one. But I kind of think that if you get fury from the death blow, that it balances out and it's okay. So that's the general build. I stuck the aspects I'm planning to use here I don't really have any specific notes about them. Feel free to look it over if this is the kind of build you're trying to make. So thanks for watching. If you have any questions, put them in the comments, and I'm going to go back to watching NDA lifting videos and see if they have any information I need. Alright, peace.